Hi, my name is Allie. I run Greenwitchmystics, a crystal and wire wrap e-commerce shop, and today I'm going to teach you how to tell if your quartz is fake. If you like learning about crystals and how to make jewelry, be sure to subscribe and follow me on social media. I am Greenwitchmystics on everything. So in this video, I'm going to go through a couple of different variations of quartz, like clear quartz, smoky quartz, citrine, and amethyst. And I'm going to go through the best ways to tell if they're fake, the worst ways to tell if they're fake, and a couple of traits to look for if they're enhanced or man-made. Quartz is made of silica and it's the most abundant mineral on Earth, so it's not very likely you'll come across fakes, but it definitely does happen. So first I'm going to go through ways that I would personally test to see if my quartz was real or not, and then as the video goes on, I'll do more detailed sections on what to look for as far as coloring goes and specific qualities to look for in fake smoky quartz, amethyst, citrine, and other quartz-based crystals. The first variation of quartz that I'll cover is clear quartz. I'll show different qualities to look for and some ways you can test it. So the first way I can usually tell if a crystal is not real, especially a quartz crystal, is by how it feels. You may have heard the saying that real crystals are cold to the touch. Some people might not understand what that means, and that's totally fine. If you pick up, let's say, a empty glass cup at room temperature versus a quartz crystal, you can usually feel the difference. Crystals are going to be a lot colder, while the glass is going to be room temperature, maybe a little bit colder than room temperature. You can also usually tell by the weight. Glass is relatively a lot lighter than quartz is, but again, some people might not have that intuition or experience. So if you don't, that's fine. I'm going to keep rolling with other ways to test. I will say with testing crystals that legitimate geologists and gemologists used multiple different tests, which is the best way to test a crystal. There's not one surefire test except for the specific gravity test, which I'll go through towards the end of this video. But keep in mind, it's always good to go through a couple of different checklists when it comes to crystals and not just one. So moving on, the next thing I would do with quartz is a scratch test. What is a scratch test? The Mohs scale of hardness was invented in 1822 by a German mineralogist named Friedrich Mohs. He came about this idea because he realized that diamonds could scratch quartz, and that was actually the starting point for this scale, and it made him curious about how strong other minerals are and other compounds. A diamond is 10 on the scale. Quartz is about a 7, steel knives are about a 6.5, glass is 5.5, copper pennies are 3.5, and things like selenite and talc are like a 2. You can scratch them with your fingernail. So for the Mohs scale of hardness test, you're going to need your quartz specimen and a sacrificial mirror or steel knife. And keep in mind that once the quartz scratches the glass or the steel, it's going to be scratched. So there's really no way to undo the scratching that you're going to do, so make sure that it's on a glass or knife that you don't really care about. So a word of advice or caution when doing this is if you're going to do it on a tower or a carved specimen, be sure not to do it on a super fine point. Although quartz is strong, it's not invincible, and points are kind of weaker spots on the crystal. There's not a big structure around them. So keep in mind, if you scratch a piece of quartz against glass on a tip, it might chip off just because it's a weak structural point. So I've got my sacrificial mirror, and I'm just going to take my quartz, and sorry for any noise, and you're just going to scrape it. And with glass, if you scraped glass against glass, chips is going to fly, there's going to be dust particles. So if you're scratching it and you don't really see a whole lot of dust and a lot of breakage, it's real. Again, keep in mind there might be some structurally weak points. So if you do see a small amount of dust, which there was a second ago, it's probably just a weak point structurally. And then you can also use a steel knife, which steel is stronger than glass. So if your piece was glass, it would definitely not be able to scratch this without getting really messed up. So if your quartz passes the cold to the touch test, it doesn't feel like plastic or glass, it scratches glass and steel perfectly fine, It's more than likely real, but if you want to be extra due diligent, I will teach you how to do a specific gravity test, which if you have a really large specimen will be kind of difficult, but it's very useful when it comes to all different types of crystals. This works for all of them. So now I'm going to go over how to do a specific gravity test. These are the items that you're going to need, and a specific gravity test measures the density of a mineral in water. So this is beneficial if you need to figure out if you have quartz versus topaz, minerals that look very similar but are very different. So first you're going to look up the specific gravity of the mineral that you're testing, and then you're going to weigh your mineral just by itself. And then you're going to get your cup of water and put it at 0. And you're going to take your wire and wrap it around the specimen that you're testing. It doesn't have to be anything fancy as long as it can just hold your mineral. Another tip I would recommend is getting a Sharpie and marking exactly where you're going to stop holding it so that it's even every time that you measure it. So that Sharpie mark is where I will hold it right above the water. And then you're going to dunk your crystal in there, making sure that you're not touching the side, it's not touching anything, it's just hovering in the water. Then you're going to write that measurement down. I measured a celestite and it was 6. And here's a little bit more of a close-up. So I'm going to divide how much it weighed by itself, divided by how much it weighed in the water. The specific gravity I got was 3.9, which is pretty close to 4. It's okay if it's a couple points off. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the clear quartz. It weighs 33.2 on its own, and then in the water the density was 12.6. And I'm going to divide that, and it's 2.63. I'm going to briefly go through some of the worst ways you can test your crystals. They're not scientifically backed, and they don't really prove a whole lot if they do pass the test. I hate the fire test. I think it originated on TikTok, and if you don't know what it is, the premise is, from my understanding, that you burn your crystal with a lighter, and if it doesn't smell like plastic, then it's real, or at least it's not plastic. My big holdup on it is there's a lot of crystals that you can permanently damage by lighting them on fire, or not lighting them on fire, but burning them with an open flame. Some crystals will have irreversible damage. Some of them, if you superheat them enough, will release gases. Not that I think a lighter would do that. You can burn yourself. It's just not a legitimate scientific test that any geologist, mineralogist would ever consider doing. So don't do it. So the next test that I hate is the ice test. Again, I'm pretty sure it originated on TikTok. I think the premise is if you put an ice cube on your crystal and it melts the ice, then it's real. The problem with that is if your environment isn't below freezing, the ice is going to melt anyway, because that's just the nature of water and freezing temperature. So again, it's not a legitimate test that any person in the mineral or crystal field is going to turn to. So you're not going to cause a lot of damage to your crystals. It's just kind of going to be a waste of time. So the way that all these quartz crystals look dramatically different is from certain mineral inclusions or heating that the earth does. So the earth heats up quartz in a specific way and it turns into citrine, amethyst, or smoky quartz depending on its environment, and sometimes can have inclusions of all three. The next crystal we're going to talk about is amethyst. There's lots of different types of amethyst. This is also known as dream amethyst or chevron amethyst. It's got really unique banding. It can sometimes even have the matrix of the crystal that it formed from, the rock that it formed from. It can come in geodes in all different shapes and sizes. So typically with amethyst, again, it's quartz and it's super abundant, so it's not very often you'll run into fake amethyst. You might run into enhanced amethyst where it's been dyed to make you think it's a higher quality than it is. With amethyst, although it can be very cheap, it can be kind of expensive. So typically with amethyst, the deeper the purple, the higher quality it is and the more expensive it's going to be. So if you have an amethyst geode that's a super deep purple versus an amethyst geode that's a little bit more washed out, the deeper the color, again, the more pricey it's going to be. Now, the type of enhancements you might see with Amethyst is going to be dye jobs, where they dye it a deeper purple to make you think it's a higher quality. Sometimes they even dye really washed out amethyst a light purple just so it looks more like amethyst. Here's some examples of what I mean by more washed out. So you can see this is almost the color of my lavender shirt versus this specimen that's a lot darker. So lower quality, a little bit higher quality. There's purples that are even deeper than that and a more saturated purple, similar to this chevron amethyst. So what you want to look for with dyed specimens like dyed amethyst is you want to look for dye within the cracks. Quartz and crystals aren't perfect. They're going to have indentations within the points. And with dye, it's going to kind of settle into the points and settle into the cracks. So they'll kind of be like lines where you can see the dye is a lot more saturated than other parts of the crystal. You can try to use pure acetone. Sometimes the dye is so saturated, sometimes the dyed agates, they'll just leave them in these dye batches forever. So the dye is within multiple layers of the stone. So sometimes you can't really get dye off of a crystal if it's really deeply embedded in there. So sometimes the acetone test with checking if a crystal is dyed or not works, sometimes it doesn't. So this right here is lab grown amethyst. So I'm going to do a close-up to kind of show you what's wrong with it. So here we have the lab grown amethyst. With lab grown quartz, it's not going to have a matrix on the bottom. And by matrix, it's more of the sedimentary rock that the crystal formed from or formed on. So as you can see with this natural amethyst piece, the bottom is covered in a sedimentary rock, where with lab grown, there wasn't one to begin with. And here you can see the dye job is a little inconsistent. It looks a little too fake. Although amethyst can have a white base like this, it's going to be a lot more blended and it's not going to look as harsh. The dye job on here also looks pretty superficial. So it just kind of looks like it's only on the surface. Whereas with this piece, it's a lot more universal. Again, not all amethyst is going to have even coloring naturally. See, this is what I mean by the white base. That's pretty normal, but there's no dye. You might have some more saturation naturally or little inclusions of iron or other minerals. As you can see on here, the clusters are all different shapes. They're not going to be universally the same size. As with these, they're all a little bit too uniformed and a little bit too much the same size. So next I'm going to talk about smoky quartz and clear quartz, qualities to look for, and how to tell if they've been enhanced in any way. So there's not a lot you can really do to clear quartz to enhance it. The only known practices that I'm aware of is superheating and supercooling quartz. That is also known as crackle quartz. Another practice that's becoming a little bit more mainstream and is a lot more difficult to pick up is taking lower quality pieces of quartz and not as dramatically superheating it and supercooling it so it has that super crazy crackle look, but it still will have newer internal breakage that wasn't there before, and this causes a really dramatic rainbow effect. And again, this is something that's really hard to tell. And it's just something that you're gonna have to trust your vendor about, trust the crystal shop you're buying, and just doing research and due diligence. Now with smoky quartz, you might not think there's any enhancements with smoky quartz, but you may actually own a piece of enhanced smoky quartz. So smoky quartz can go through a process called irradiation, which basically they're putting radiation onto smoky quartz, typically making it a lot darker than it naturally was. So I'll try to throw up some pictures and explain a little further. So this is an example of irradiated smoky quartz. They hit it with gamma rays, and typically the tops will be darker than the bottom towards the matrix. The matrix will be more opaque and kind of white like these. It can be a little tricky because sometimes quartz just naturally has a little bit whiter of a base. but it's definitely exaggerated with irradiated quartz. And then it can get kind of tricky because there are some really high quality smoky quartz pieces that are very, very dark, like Moorian quartz. Obviously, with this next one, it's not irradiated. If it was, the base would be a lot more white. So my best advice would be, if you're buying a nice smoky quartz piece, make sure you know where it's from, its country of origin, and familiarize yourself with what smoky quartz pieces look like from there, and use your best judgment on comparing them. This is a great picture showing the difference between regular smoky quartz and irradiated smoky quartz in a tumble or raw form. But again, it may be a little difficult if you don't know all the smoky quartz varieties and qualities. So do your best to research and never be scared to ask questions. So now I'm going to go through smoky quartz and clear quartz qualities. Sometimes there's really nice qualities to where newbies or people that don't have a trained eye might think that it's fake. I've posted videos of really high quality clear quartz and people are like, that's glass, you're crazy. And I say, hold on. This is girasol quartz. It is a really high quality quartz that is a little bit more on the milky side, and some qualities can really have virtually no imperfections. But overall, it's a really impeccable quality, and that doesn't mean that it's fake. And here's a scratch test. It's quartz, in case anyone was questioning. Here's some other examples of high quality quartz. Obviously you can see some imperfections in these and internal breakage, but sometimes in a batch, a shop might have a quality like this and have a couple that are almost perfect. That's just what happens when you cut into a large boulder, basically, of crystal that's really high quality. You're gonna have different cuts. Some portions of the crystal are going to be super high quality, no imperfections. Some are going to have a little bit more. Here is a super high quality smoky quartz sphere. Again, you can see a couple little internal inclusions, but that's not out of the ordinary to have a small chunk of high quality crystal that has basically no imperfections. So with smoky quartz, if the color is a little too dark, I would question if it's been irradiated or not. This is a great example of, it's dark, but you can still see through it. It's not like pitch black. Here is an example of a lab-grown piece of smoky quartz. Again, there's no matrix on the bottom. It's pretty prickly. I had to stop this video because researching pictures for this, I have seen an alarming amount of lab-grown smoky quartz being sold as natural smoky quartz. So that is a base you don't want. This is a perfect example of a natural quartz base. It's one solid piece of rock and the clusters look like they're growing naturally out of it. And here is an example of lab-grown clear quartz cluster. Again, no matrix at the bottom. All the clusters are a little bit too uniformed in shape. This would definitely fool someone who's a newbie. And again, this was more expensive than if I just bought regular natural quartz. I do think that technology over time, it'll become cheaper. But for now, you're probably not going to run into any lab-grown quartz, as it's just more expensive than if they just were to dig it from the ground and clean it. This takes a lot of time, technology, energy, and manpower to make. So I know I said that I was going to cover citrine, but I think I'm going to save that for a separate video because all the enhancements with citrine and the fakes and price points and qualities, it's a lot. So I'm going to cover citrine on a separate video, although everything that I showed, except for maybe some of the qualities and coloring and enhancements, are going to work for citrine. So if you want to know if your citrine is at least quartz, everything that I showed is going to be able to show that to you. As far as enhancements go and origins, not so much. So now I'm going to briefly go over qualities of rose quartz. Typically the highest quality comes from Mozambique, and as you can see, this piece is super see-through. Same with this one. So see-through quartz is higher quality typically, where lower quality rose quartz like this is a little bit milkier and has some more white patches and isn't as translucent. With broken raw chunks, some people may think it's glass. However, quartz and glass breaks the same in conchoidal fractures, which looks like that. So it's totally normal. Thank you for watching. Comment any questions down below, and I'll see you next time.